us in Western Europe, the spectre of competition from the developing world grows more and more alarming. Asian countries in particular seem able to combine low wages, eagerness to work hard, and rising skill levels to produce ever cheaper and better goods. In the face of this threat, a fall in our share of world trade seems almost inevitable, bringing mass unemployment and social instability in its wake. Most Western European politicians say we must meet this challenge by increasing competitiveness, either through reductions in costs or increases in investment and training. However, a small but growing number of people reject this approach as unrealistic. They argue that if we want to save our jobs and the social stability which only high employment can bring, we must shut out some of the imports pouring into Western Europe from the developing world. Sir James Goldsmith, the Anglo-French financier, now leads a new party in the European Parliament. Sir James, what do you think that we should do about the imports from developing nations that could affect jobs and social stability in Western Europe?
First of all, understand that the world has changed. David Blunkett just said that a few minutes ago. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall, 4 billion people have entered into the world economy. Chinese, Indians, Vietnamese, Indonesians, etc. Now, they've lived completely apart up till now. Their salaries have been trivial. You could employ 47 Vietnamese or 47 people from the Philippines for the price, for instance, of one person in France or America, Britain some little bit less. Now, most of them, a large number, are unemployed. Two other major changes have taken place. Before, they were blocked away in their own world by their political systems, usually communist or socialist or national socialist in some cases. Secondly, they didn't have technology. And thirdly, they didn't have access to capital. Now their political system has changed. Technology can be transferred instantaneously on a microchip anywhere in the world. Capital controls have gone, and now they can be transferred instantaneously to wherever the return on that capital is highest. So you have a global economy, and what that means is that the labor forces of Europe are in direct competition, without barriers, with the labor forces of China. That's what would happen under the new GATT arrangements.
Yes.
Now, what happens under those circumstances? Just imagine two companies. One company in Europe, one company manufacturing for Europe in China or in Vietnam. They're manufacturing the identical products, destined to the identical markets here, Europe. They're using identical technology. They have access to identical capital, the same pool of world capital, global capital. There's only one difference. In one country, you can employ 47 people, able people, for the price you pay for one person here. Now, you do not have to be a genius to understand what occurs under those circumstances. And anybody who's willing to have the patience to look at the facts just a bit can see what has happened. Free trade, global free trade, started about 20 years ago in Europe because the Treaty of Rome was built on what was known as community preference, which was not free trade. About 20 years ago, it started to move. And during that period, let me give you the figures. It's just one or two figures. I won't bore you with too many. But in France, you had, in 1973, 420,000 unemployed. Between 1973 and 1993, the economy grew by 80%, 80, almost doubling. And the number of unemployed went from 420,000 to 5.1 million. What can be the purpose of an economy which by doubling goes to 5.1 billion? I'll also give you the figures for England in a moment.
Well, yes. Now, that was a long answer, but a good answer. I want people to understand, the viewer, to understand the dimension of the problem and why you've applied your mind to it. And you set out your side of the case very lucidly. Let me put this to you, though. Please. Let's get down to cases.
Please.
On your own analysis, we've got to shut out imports from those countries, haven't we?
We have to shut out imports which destroy jobs. You've got to understand that the purpose of the economy is to serve society. It's not just to make profits. It's to create employment, social stability, and social contentment.
All right. Now,
and we're not doing this. I mean, let me just mention it. Sorry.
Well, now let me ask you this, you see. You see, the reason I ask you is I haven't disagreed with you yet.
No,
I
please.
might get around to disagreeing with you, but not yet.
Right.
See, this will puzzle a lot of people. Here are the politicians, the grand panjandrums of Western Europe, socialists, conservatives, liberals, all sorts of chaps, all pondering away at the same issue. And not a single one of them comes up, except for you and the group around you in your new party, with that solution. They all say, oh, yes, we must compete harder, we must get our costs down, we must invest more and all the rest of it. Why do they say that? Why haven't they spotted that all these imports should be kept out?
Well, it was George Orwell who said that intellectuals can never see anything which is obvious. This is...
A lot of those politicians aren't intellectuals. I do assure you of
right.
that.
Well, whatever they think they are. I mean, the facts are so obvious. If you look at what's happened in England, they must have been wrong. I mean, in the last 20 years, the growth in England, GNP growth, I've taken it here, is up nearly 50%. During that period, the number of people living in official poverty, this is official statistics, have risen from 6.6 million to 13.6 million. That's a doubling of those living in poverty during a period in which the economy has grown, not contracted.
Sure.
Unemployment has gone from 652,000 to 2.28 million during a period in which the economy has grown by 50%. The number of children living in poverty is, according to the official statistics, 32%. Now, what is the purpose of having a 50 or 60, and the figures are worse if you add them to 10 years, because the economy has grown by 97% in 10 years, and those figures in the previous 10 years, and those figures are worse. What is the purpose of having a growing economy which impoverishes the nation? So, of course, it is absolutely essential to start from the basic principle. What is the purpose of the economy? It is to enrich us, and therefore, how do we have an economy which can provide jobs and prosperity?
All right. Now, you haven't, you know, Sir James, really answered my question.
And I'm going to.
But hang on.
Yes.
You haven't answered my question of why all these other guys are, in your view, wrong. Let me suggest a reason why they hold a view contrary to yours. Namely that it isn't as simple as you're making it sound. They think that if they shut out imports, if they adopted what we call protectionism, Europe would have to pay a fearful cost for that.
Yes.
Now, that's what they believe.
Of course, that is nonsense. Firstly,
it's what they believe, though,
I know they believe that, and they also have...
Why is it nonsense?
They also have vested interests which are different to those of society.
True.
So there is actually a conflict, a deep conflict of interest between the elites of power on the one hand. But insofar as the cost, let me address this. Most of the exports of European countries, including the United Kingdom, are destined to Europe, about 70%, with the enlarged Europe as it's now becoming. So the bulk of trade goes to Europe. Now, but why have we had this increase in economic growth and this massive decrease in employment? The reason is simple. Let me just give you a concrete example. In the case that I talked to you about, the two companies, one having to, which can't compete, it's perfectly obvious that the company in Europe, when it can't compete, it has to transfer its production to one of the cheap labor cost countries. So say that I'm a company making shoes in France or shoes in Germany. I can transfer the production to Vietnam, and I will save about 20% of my turnover, because you spend about 25 to 30% on salaries. Sure. Therefore, if you have a company with £100 million of sales, and I transfer the production abroad, I save £20 million a year, which is straight profit. I become extremely rich. Whereas if I stay in Europe, I go bankrupt. So we are creating an economic system which bankrupts those who employ their national labor force and makes into millionaires those who eliminate their national labour force and go abroad.
All right, but Sir James, come on. You see, your way of doing things, shutting out imports, may, or it may not, save jobs. Supposing I conceded it would save some jobs. It is bound, in some sense, to be impoverishing, isn't it?
No.
Take just one example. You say no blithely. Just think for a moment. If you shut out goods, that inevitably means that people in Western Europe will have to pay higher prices by buying goods paid for at European wage levels or accept lower quality. And since most of them won't accept lower quality, the amount that they have to pay out over the counter will go up, won't it?
No, sir.
Why?
I'll tell you why, because you've got to look at real cost. A consumer is not just a consumer. A consumer is also a worker. He's also a city dweller, and he's also a taxpayer. And if that consumer gets certain benefits on cheaper goods, although I've noticed a remarkable lack of reduction of sales prices when people do transfer their production offshore, if they do, it's compensated for by the fact that the increase in unemployment is so great that they can lose their jobs. And it'll be massive, and it is already massive. Secondly, their taxes will go up because the cost of that unemployment will be substantial, not only in social but economic terms. And therefore, finally, as city dwellers, they will have their lives and their cities destabilized, as we're seeing, because the cities themselves are becoming socially destabilized. So if you are just, and I know you are not, a person who counts and doesn't understand the consequences of what you're counting, you are saying as a consumer they might, or might not, get cheaper goods. What I'm saying is as a citizen, not just as a consumer, but as a taxpayer, as a city dweller, and as somebody who needs a job, they will lose and lose sharply because their societies will be destroyed. But also your premise is wrong. I'm not suggesting cutting everything off. I'm suggesting instead of having a multilateral, global a free trade area, where all of a sudden we have a free trade area with China, and whereby our labor force is in direct competition with 1,300,000,000 Chinese, plus a lot of others. I'm saying have bilateral agreements. Import what you need. Sorry.
I'll come to that. But let me take you up on the first point. You see, unlike you say that I'm not just a fellow who would grab at the first straw. I hope you're right. Unlike you, I admit that there's something in your case. I think it possibly is the case that you would find that all sorts of costs that we currently bear would fall. But unlike you, and I put it to you again, I think on a cost-benefit analysis, and so apparently do most people, most politicians in Western Europe, and most businessmen, on a cost-benefit analysis, the extra charges that you would have to pay by having European high-priced goods, whereas you now have, like Sony televisions, lower-priced Asian goods in, would more than outweigh any benefit you got from any savings that you made.
But you will destroy your society. But let me explain to you...
Hang on, that's a different point.
Well,
we're on the point of economics at the moment.
Well, let me explain to you why business agrees with you. Let me explain what has happened. Business has got a dream. It has got unlimited access to an unlimited labor force worldwide at a trivial cost. Now, our societies, our developed societies, have been able to reach a consensus on the sharing out of what is called value added. If you take raw material and make a product, you value add it. You share the value added between capital and labor. And that sharing has been done on a basis which is the result of debates and political action and lockouts and strikes and the rest. That is being shattered. You bring 4 billion people in direct competition with our labor force, and what you are doing is you are transforming the basis in which you share that value added. A trivia will go to labor, and the overwhelming majority will go to capital. Now, I happen to be a capitalist.
I know, and a very successful
one. And let me tell you this.
Let me put this to you.
Yes.
Let me put this to you. You see, again, I concede that there's something in that. But it must be a matter of plain common sense. But if you are going to shut out a whole range of cheaper goods, the Western European consumer is going to have to pay a lot more. and therefore, to that extent, he's going to be poorer, isn't he?
No, because he is destroying his society.
But that's a different point.
It is not a different point, because if he pays it in extra taxation, if he pays it in lower earnings, look at what has happened before the Uruguay round. You must understand, GATT has already had 8 rounds, of which the Uruguay round is the 8th, and Clinton already wants a 9th. Right. Now, what has happened? In America, where you have flexibility on salaries, the average weekly earnings in the past 20 years has gone down 19.3%, so, adjusted for inflation. So they might be able to pay some of their goods, buy them at a cheaper price, but their salaries have gone down 19.3% because the working man's salary has been hit because he's in competition with people who are willing to work for a fraction of his salary. It's nothing compared to what's going to happen tomorrow. But in Europe, where we do not have the same flexibility, how has the population taken it in the neck? By unemployment, from 420,000 to 5.1 million in France.
Let's look at another consequence of this, because I leave aside the fact that you could, if you removed foreign competition, make European business that much more lazy and less efficient. Let's take the very point you raised, bilateralism. You say, oh, it's all right, we'll make a deal with these chaps here. Yeah, fine, old world, it would be if we could. It will hit our exports, because if we retaliate against their exports, they'll retaliate against our exports. And 13% of all Europe's jobs depend upon export trading. And if we go along to them and say, we'd like a nice little agreement with you, whereby we shut out anything we don't want, and you take anything we want to give you, you know what they'll tell you, don't you, Sir James? And in no very polite terms either. You won't be able to make that kind of bilateral agreement which suits Europe but doesn't suit the developing nations.
Yes.
Will you?
The answer is yes, you will.
Then they must be mugs,
as Japan has proven. Japan all along has been a protected economy, has imported only those things they want to import, and have been the biggest exporters of all. They are the living proof that what you've just said is not the case. Now, you want to import, firstly, the European market, which would be given preferential treatment, is the biggest single free trading area in history. It is larger than anything we ever envisaged, ever envisaged. That the idea that there wouldn't be competition to keep us lean and mean in competing against the Germans and the Italians and everybody else is naive. This is the biggest market of all.
All right, briefly, Sir James,
yeah.
The very, very last question. You see, a lot of people think there's something in your case. I'm not sure I don't. I think you spoil it by pretending that there's nothing in the case of everybody else. Now, don't you concede anything to the Western European politicians and the Western European businessmen about the sort of things I've put to you.
No, I think this is a completely flawed view. I believe it will destroy our communities.
All right, Sir James, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.